Before we get into this incredible interview with Yasmine Mohammed, author of Unveiled, I found out some information about her foundation called Free Hearts, Free Minds, which I think you should know about. There are only 10% of the people that apply to that organization that get to be helped because of a lack of funds. So if you listen to this interview and you find her mission inspiring and you want to make a difference, the best thing you can do is to go to Free Hearts, Free Minds, the website, and make a donation there so that they can help more people find freedom and safety. Thanks for listening. Let's get into the show. This week on the Read Well podcast, I have a very special guest with me today. This is Yasmine Mohammed. She has written one of the most powerful memoirs I've ever read. In fact, this is my favorite book of the year so far. As you all know, I teach people how to read deeply, to spend time with books that matter. So the tagline here is to read slowly, take notes, and apply the ideas. Well, after I read Yasmine's book, it really made me see the world differently. And I found her through a podcast she did with Sam Harris, somebody who I look up to. And now I have Yasmine in my world as well. And it's just so great to have her on the show today. She is a human rights activist, an author, a speaker, and she's working very hard to sort of open the story of what's really happening around the world. This is interesting because I live in the Western culture. I live in Utah, and the story that we're going to talk about with Yasmine today is not something I'm exposed to on a daily basis. And so this was a really powerful message for me. And Yasmine, I know you're very busy, but I want to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm a little low energy. I don't know if you've noticed that my energy's kind of low. I've got tennis elbow, so I'm just like, just gritting through the pain. So I'm not going to be my normal upbeat self, but I'm doing my hardest, doing my best.
Tennis elbow is rough. My wife actually has that right now as well.
Gosh.
And
Give her all the love.
It was interesting. Yeah, she has a water bottle like this, right? And she was filling it up, and she started screaming because she couldn't hold the water bottle. And I was like, wow, that is really bad.
Oh, it is unbelievable pain, like just out of nowhere. You're just living your life, and then it's just doing the most mundane task. Yeah, it's just so sharp. Yeah.
It's a weird thing how you don't realize how important something is until it's gone. So when you have back pain or knee pain or whatever, it's a crazy thing. Mm-hmm. Well, to make this event more special, this is a live event also for members of the book club. So if you are a member of the Read Well book club, you are in the audience. And feel free, everyone, to chat me your questions, and I'll see those. And if they're appropriate, I'll ask Yasmine when the time comes. So I'm going to try and keep this to an hour, just out of respect for your time. But I have 1,000 questions. So I was hoping we could start with your book. Is that okay if we start here with Unveiled?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Unveiled is the subtitle is, I think, really, really interesting. How Western liberals empower radical Islam. When I first got the book, I thought that is a really interesting title, and it made me want to read the book. But can you walk me through, or the audience, like why did you write this book? Like why does it even exist?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you mentioned, Sam Harris. So he started it all. There was a episode of Real Time with Bill Maher where he was a guest on there talking about his book. And the other guest was Ben Affleck. And this was like 10 years ago. So in that episode, what happened was Sam and Bill actually were both trying to talk about how liberals are very supportive of liberal ideas, insofar as soon as it comes up against Islam, then suddenly they don't want to talk about it. So they started giving, examples. So free expression, free speech, LGBT, freedom of religion, all of these things. They're all like, yeah. And then you're like, people can be killed in the Islamic world for like being gay or for renouncing their religion or for all of these things that you supposedly hold dear. And suddenly they're like, that's Islamophobia. We can't talk about that. So it was really great for me to be watching that episode as a woman who had renounced Islam and whose mom is from Egypt. And one of the examples that Bill was giving was that people like me who have renounced the religion, in Egypt, there was a poll, like there was a poll, there was a question that asked, should people who have renounced their religion be executed? And close to 90% of the people said yes. So Egypt is one of the Muslim majority countries today that is progressive in that it will not execute you for leaving the religion. It will, you will go to an insane asylum. You could go to prison for up to 5 years, but you won't be executed like you would be in like a dozen other countries. But Egyptians felt like they should change that law, that, people like me should be killed. And so to have these two men on HBO, talking about me as if I mattered was really like, it made me feel like, I guess I do matter, like maybe my life does matter. This is significant. If I'm trying to minimize myself because I live in a world where I know that my story is politically incorrect. And so I haven't even shared anything about my life with anybody. And here these guys are on TV talking about it like, no, we should be fighting. We should be speaking about these things. And so I was like, yeah. And then the next day on my Facebook, everybody was, of course, I don't know if you remember the episode, but Ben Affleck jumps in and he starts calling them gross and racist, and he basically shuts down the conversation. And then the next day on my Facebook, it was just covered in like my friends, like people I've known for decades, commenting on how Ben Affleck was so great for shutting down those gross and racist men. And I realized like, I have to speak up. Like I can't, even with the people in my life, they didn't even know like the truth. They were so misinformed. And the criticisms, of course, of Bill and Sam had nothing to do with what they were saying, because of course, how can you engage with that argument? Like it's just crystal clear. It makes perfect sense. Like why would you only care about gay people who don't live in Muslim majority countries? The ones who live in Muslim majority countries, we're not going to care about them. Like how can you justify that? Or freedom of speech or freedom of religion or anything. How can you say, yes, I believe in all of those things universally, except for in these 57 Muslim majority countries, right? Like you can't. How are you even going to criticize what these men have said without, exposing yourself as a hypocrite? And so they weren't engaging with the ideas at all. They just kept saying, these are straight white men that shouldn't be talking. These straight white American men don't have a right, blah, blah, blah. And so that's what made me feel like, okay, so brown-skinned Arab woman, I'm going to say the exact same thing, and it will force you to engage with the argument because you can't just get stopped at my immutable characteristics. And that's what made me decide to start writing the book.
It's a really powerful interview to watch. If you all have not seen the interview, you should Google Sam Harris, Ben Affleck, and you will find it on YouTube. It's powerful because there's a lot to unpack there, right? I mean, let's look at Ben Affleck, for example. And I don't want to get too deep into this because everybody's talked about this interview 1,000 times, and I want to spend more on the book. But there's a lot in that interview where Ben Affleck is I think coming at it with good intentions, but just getting it wrong, right? He's trying to defend people and be inclusive, but in doing that is actually, like your subtitle says, he's empowering radical Islam. He's not helping it. And we see this now on the college campuses. We have people who want to do good. These young people are wanting to save the world. They're wanting to stand up for people. They're wanting to be activists, human rights activists or whatever. But when you get the aim a little wrong, you end up doing more harm than good, right? So can you walk me through maybe what harm was created by Ben Affleck's good intent?
So the first harm is that he shut down the conversation and he made it difficult for the victims to be able to speak up, or for people with power to speak up for the powerless. So that's the first problem. It's like you couldn't expect the Black people in South Africa to dismantle apartheid by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You needed the support of the white politicians or of the international community. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. Like, you can't expect, it is difficult. They are doing it. You've seen the Woman Life Freedom movement in Iran, but, people are murdered without a thought in these countries for just speaking up their opinions, for asking questions, so we need people with power. We need the international community to speak up for us. So it was such a disservice to humanity that he shut down such an important conversation. It was at such a there was such a crossroads there. There was such an opportunity. We were just at the cusp, oh, this is great. It could have gone in the other direction, but the way he shut down the conversation, and then the way he, came out the winner of this situation, just, it confirmed that we should all be quiet. And it just confirmed that we should not criticize this religion. It confirmed the criticism that Sam and Bill had to begin with, which is that we can't criticize these things. And he basically just jumped in and played the role of the useful idiot. And he was like, oh, you mean like this? And then he just went ahead and did exactly what they were talking about. It's very, very frustrating. We risk our lives. I'm not saying this lightly. This to be true, right? Even in New York, Salman Rushdie getting his eye stabbed out, decades after writing his novel. They haven't forgotten, this is, and he wrote a novel, so it doesn't take much, and we're in such a precarious, difficult, vulnerable position. And so to have people with influence and power speak up on our behalf is so, so meaningful. And so for someone like Ben to ruin that moment was just devastating for me.
So Unveiled is your story of what you experienced growing up in a radically fundamentalist Islamic family. But you grew up in Canada, which is an interesting sort of twist, right? But your family was very, very deep into the religion and we'll go through this story in just a minute. But you said a couple of things there that I wanted to point out. One, that people feel like they can't criticize this religion. And the left, and again, this is my podcast isn't a show about politics or whatever. It's a show about truth and finding good information, and that's what I'm trying to get to here. So what you pointed out is that people on sort of left of center want to accept you and your beliefs and sort of promote that, which I think is okay to let everybody believe what they want to believe, but that doesn't mean that beliefs can't be criticized and questioned, right? That's where we go wrong. And I would love for you to speak to that. Like, what happens if we're too scared to question the validity of some beliefs? What bad comes from that?
Well, you end up empowering those beliefs. You end up with students on university campuses supporting terrorist organizations like Hamas. Like, if we're going to take it to something that is happening currently today, because when I wrote my book, people looked at the subtitle and they were like, give me examples of this happening. They couldn't, they didn't really see it. Where nobody asks me that question in interviews anymore, because everybody can see where this can lead. This is what ends up happening when you've got the ignorance and the propaganda being so, it's just been so successful over all of these years. We're talking petrodollars, billions and billions of petrodollars coming from Qatar and coming from Iran, funding these Ivy League universities for decades. Like, this is the natural result of that, right? So if you do not have values that you can stand firm next to, and instead you're standing firm next to a skin color or a religion or an ethnicity or something like that, then you're gonna have problems. You know what I mean? Like, that's basically white supremacy. These are the things that we speak up against. You know what I mean? Why to make any judgments based on skin color or ethnicity or religion or anything like that. We should be looking at what is right and what is wrong. And that confusion there is what has led to these kids who say that they are, LGBT champions, or say that they are even socialists, and they believe in all of these freedoms, but then they're supporting a terrorist organization that has been funded by Iran, a terrorist organization that is hand in hand. They just today I saw an article where Hamas is congratulating Taliban on having over 1,000 days with girls not being able to go to school. These are the people. These are these are the folks that you want to stand behind. Like, think about that. Take 3 seconds to think about it. But they've just been fed the propaganda so successfully over the years. And it is not just from the Arab world, it's Soviet as well, right? Because now we're talking about anti-Semitism, and we're talking about how easy it is to feed this trope of good guy versus bad guy, white versus brown, oppressor versus oppressed, right? It's almost like a nursery rhyme. It's so infantile. It's so simplistic. It's not based in reality, of course, because the world is not black and white like that. We're not on a Disney movie where the bad guy wears a black hat and the good guy wears a white hat. Like, that's not how things work. But they want things to fit neatly into a TikTok video. And so they don't look at the whole situation. So even when the women of Iran were being shot in the streets by the IRGC, burning their hijabs in the streets, even then, feminists in the West were hemming and hawing and not really sure if they should support these women, because would that be considered Islamophobic? It's just so beyond repugnant that they're not thinking about right and wrong, good and bad. They're thinking about, what is my political alignment, and what will the cult allow me to say?
So there's a couple of things there. One, we talked about people like Salman Rushdie, and anybody who's sharing their voices are having to live courageously in order to get that message out. And then we've also talked about people who want to do the right thing but are running on misinformation. They're funded by petrodollars and all sorts of other things. And so we're really causing more problems than good. So I want to sort of address both of those. One of the reasons why your book stands out to me is I'm curious about you. I mean, by having written this publication, that puts you in danger at all times. And it's terrifying. And I would love to just share with you sort of my journey with your book, because it was, if anybody is going to buy Yasmine's book, this is how you should do it the way I did it. So I started by listening to it on Audible. And I had a big car ride with my family. So I thought, this is great. I'll plug it in and I'll listen to it. Well, Yasmine is the narrator on the Audible book. And the reason why that is so great is because her story, which we'll get into in a minute, is heartbreaking. And I hope it's okay that I say this, but I can hear a lot of pain in your voice as we're going through the hundreds of stories of things you've experienced. And so it broke my heart. I'm talking to my wife and my daughter in the car. I'm like, you've got to hear her story. This is crazy. And then I came back and I bought the physical book. So you should all get the audiobook and the physical book, because the physical book comes with some pictures in the middle, which you don't get in the audiobook. And that got to me even more. Just sort of like, there's a picture here. I love the picture of the dog. It says, dogs are dirty in Islam, but we love our little Norbert. There's a little picture of their dog.
He's right here next to me.
Oh, you got Norbert next to you? I love that.
Yeah. He's always
there's
next
an
to
actual there's an actual story in the book. You talk about when you used to be ticklish. So there's a picture of Yasmine here being tickled in the 70s. Can we start there, because that's sort of before all of the bad happened. So why do you share a story about how you used to be ticklish? What does that mean?
Well, I endured a lot of years of, physical and sexual abuse. So I did a lot of just separating myself from my body.
Hmm.
And I didn't even realize that, I didn't know that I used to be ticklish until I saw that photo. Nobody's ever asked me this question before. I'm used to the
It's a
same
beautiful
questions. And
story.
so, yeah, but I haven't desensitized myself to this question because I don't usually get it.
If it's too
Yeah, I
hard, we
was
don't
really
need to talk about it.
surprised. No, I'm okay. I was just really surprised when I saw that photo because I couldn't remember what it felt like to be ticklish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, your story starts off with you and your mom, and things were normal. You had beautiful friends. You got to play Barbies. You got to go out in
Yeah.
the summer and in your summer dress and have a good time. And for people
Yeah.
who are sort of getting new to the story, your father left, and your mom needed a way to support herself and get help with the kids, and so she found that support in religion. But before that, she was not religious, correct?
That's correct. So my mom and dad met in university in Cairo. My dad's actually from Gaza, but Egypt was
Mm-hmm.
Gaza was under Egyptian authority at the time. So he was able to go to university in Egypt. And that's where him and my mom met. And like my mom at the wedding photos, you've seen them, right? They're in the book. She's got a
Mm-hmm.
short dress on. She's like, her hair, like she looks like a Bond girl. They
She
had belly
does.
dancers and whiskey at their wedding. There was no religion whatsoever. It was not a part of their lives. They moved to San Francisco, in fact, because it was all about
Don't know if y'all can
yeah,
see that, but that's the picture, right? So is this your
that's
mom
right.
right here?
That's my
Yeah.
Aunt Erica on the left, and then
Okay.
my uncle, my cousin that's sitting on her lap, and then that's my Uncle Muhammad. No, sorry. My Uncle Muhammad's in the white shirt. My dad is in the black, and my mom is the one in white in the middle. That's my mom,
Yeah, right in the middle.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so, yeah, nobody in those days in Egypt or anywhere in the Middle East, like Iran, Libya, Afghanistan, like anywhere in that area, the only time you would ever see like religious people or even hijab would be like in the villages, right? Uneducated.
Mm-hmm.
So in the big cities with the educated folk, religion was like a relic of the past. Your grandmother talked about religion, but they were like moving forward. They still considered themselves Muslim. They still, like cultural Christians are in the United States, like you
Mm-hmm.
at a wedding or something, like you'd have it in a church. You know what I mean? Like it was just like not an everyday part of their
Yeah.
life the way it is today.
Yeah.
And so they moved to San Francisco, and it was the, peace, love, and hippie days. So this is late 60s. And their marriage fell apart, basically, even though they were both progressive minded. I think San Francisco in the 60s was a little bit much for my mom coming from Egypt, even though she wasn't what you would consider conservative in Egypt by any stretch of the imagination. When she was in San Francisco, she was considered conservative, traditional kind of thinking. And so their marriage fell apart, and it fell apart, and they said, okay, let's move to Canada. Let's try and find like some more, a quieter atmosphere to raise the kids in. And that's where I was born, in Vancouver. And like when my mom was still pregnant with me, they separated.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad moved to Montreal, so over to the other side of Canada. And my mom was left with 3 kids on her own in a new country. Everything was new job, she didn't have her husband with her. She didn't have a support system. She hadn't made any friends yet. And so she decided to go to the mosque simply out of a place to find community, out of a place to find like perhaps maybe other Arabic speaking women or something like that. It wasn't because she was looking for, spiritual guidance. But, you know, unfortunately, that's where she met this man that was already married, already had 3 children, but took my mom on as his second wife, because in Islam, a man can have up to 4 wives. And that's when everything changed, right? That's when he like put a hijab on her, started forcing us to memorize Quran and pray 5 times a day. No more playing Barbies with your friends because you can't play with non-Muslim people. No more riding your bike. No more swimming. No more birthday parties. No more music. Like literally everything was no. Everything was forbidden. And so as a 6-year-old, of course, I hated him and I hated what he was doing to our lives. And I looked to my mom to be the one to stop him from doing this. I was really resentful because my sister, who's 3 years older than me, had all these opportunities that I was looking forward to, like I was going to get her 2-wheeler, but then I never got an opportunity. Like she got to go to a sleepover birthday party and I was looking forward to my chance, but I never got the opportunity. So I just felt like there were so many things that I was looking forward to that he came along and he was like, yoink, all of these things are now forbidden. You're going to burn in hell if you do any of these things. And not being able to play with my best friends was really tough too, because that's your life as a child is going to the playground or playing Barbies with your friends. And so to take that away from a kid was like absolutely devastating. I resented everything about him and everything about how he was changing our lives. But my mom didn't, she didn't see things the way I saw them. Like I recount in my book this moment where he took all of her records because she used to love country music. So we always had like Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers, Hank Williams playing in the house. And he took all of her records and he was standing up next to her and the 3 of us were sitting on the carpet and he hands us our mom's records, like shards that he had broken. And he's like, here, break these. And I'm looking at my mom like, this guy just is breaking your stuff. Like he just walked into our apartment and he's just breaking your stuff. And my mom just stood there, looking down at the carpet and not lifting her eyes up. And I was so, just perplexed, like what's going on? Because if my brother had come into my room and started breaking my toys, I'd be livid, but my mom had zero reaction. And it was kind of like the moment that told us, okay, there's a new sheriff in town. Like your mom is now irrelevant. Like this guy's going to come in here. He can control the situation to the point that he can like break her stuff right in front of her and she's not going to even react to that. So that was it. That was the beginning of the end, and then eventually we ended up moving into his house, into the basement of his house. And then the control got even tighter. We went to Islamic schools. I always carried with me a hope that things would return back to the way they were, that my mom would snap out of this. But she didn't. She only got worse. She became a scholar of Islamic studies. She started going to Al-Azhar University in Egypt. She got her master's degree in Islamic studies. She became the head of the Islamic studies department at the Islamic school. She
All
just
in. Yeah.
all in, just complete, born again. She really, really, the idea, a lot of these Islamists, it's pro-Islam, but it's also anti-West. It's like this. The pro-Islam, anti-West sentiments are so intertwined. And my mom just, the anti-West sentiments resonated with her so deeply because she was angry at the West because the debauchery of this country is what caused her marriage to fail.
Ah.
Yeah. So one of the grandfathers of this Islamist movement, his name is Sayyid Qutb, and he came to America, and he had a similar situation where he tried to get an American girlfriend, but he couldn't. They all thought he was weird or whatever. He couldn't. No one was interested in him, and so he turned that into like anger towards American women. Right? They're all a bunch of whores anyway. Look at them. Sleeping around with everybody else, but like not with me. And so then he just got like it was just such a deep anger, and that led to his pro-Islam, anti-West, creation of this ideology. And my mom, like it just resonated with her perfectly. She was like, yes, exactly. These whores, they're the ones that ruined my marriage, like she was like all over it. And yeah, so when we say all in, like she was all in, and she just got worse and worse and worse over the years. And that's how I ended up being married to a terrorist.
Which happened. It was an arranged marriage, and you found out later that he was an Al Qaeda operative, essentially the head of Bin Laden's terrorist cell in Canada, and you didn't know at the time. Yeah,
I didn't know at the time until CSIS, who are the Canadian CIA. They're the ones who reached out to me through a long series of convoluted events that you know about because you've read the book, and that's how I finally found out.
So a couple things. First question. I don't mean to be jovial in a serious moment, but is yoink an official term? I'm just curious. Is that what?
It's a
Scooby-Doo
term.
Because I know I grew up on Scooby-Doo. Did you get to watch Scooby-Doo when you were a little girl? Was that a part of your education?
Yes,
Good
I did.
For you.
We had like the 5 channels that you go clunk, clunk, clunk. Yeah, that's what we had.
Yeah. I had to use pliers to change art because the knob fell off. That's fine. So I think a question that I have is sort of this strictness that you felt as it got tighter and tighter. Is that a common household milieu, or is that just like the radical version of this faith? Right, because a lot of people say no. Islam is a religion of peace, and it's just the fanatical people that are this way. I mean, what's going on?
So that's a great question. So first of all, this trajectory that I described that my mom went through, that went throughout the Middle East. Right, it started in Iran with the Islamic regime of Iran in like 1979 when they took power. And then the Saudis were like, oh my gosh, the Shias are having political power. Like, we have to spread our word. And so then they started building mosques all over the world and giving their Qur'ans out for free. And, I don't know if you remember in the 80s how there was like this, just like the money that went into building Islamic schools and mosques all over the West. It was like this, they were like in this Cold War of who was going to be the leader of. Yes, exactly. And so this idea of political Islam or Islamists, that started with the Muslim Brotherhood after World War I, basically. After the Ottoman Empire fell, it was in Egypt. That's where it started. They got together. They called themselves the Muslim Brotherhood. And they said, well, what are we going to do now? How are we going to spread Islam into Europe? We just lost our biggest empire. How do we get it back? We can't do it the same way we did it the first time, through raping and pillaging and, swords and killing. We have to do it in a different way because now the world is different. And so they came up with this 100-year plan, which if you go online, you'll find it there because it was part of the FBI case, surrounding, not just 9/11, but before that with the bombings of the World Trade Center. And so that's when they discovered that these guys had this plan to spread Islam through the West using different passive means, basically non-violent means, until they had enough power then they would use violence. But in the beginning, they would do it through ways of like immigration, through the wombs of the Muslim mothers, so through bringing up the demographics of the Muslim population, through using secular laws against itself. So you can see that with terms like Islamophobia. That's how you stifle free speech, by using really, a word that sounds like xenophobia, homophobia, all of these things that we don't want. So let's just co-opt that, call it Islamophobia, and then we're going to have all of these people, use it to stifle criticism, and it works like a charm. Everything on their 100-year plan worked like a charm, of course. We can see it working like a charm right now. The idea of bringing up the demographics of Muslims, of course, was to affect the voting, which is a way of, again, using secular laws against itself. So these folks called the Muslim Brotherhood, they were in the beginning just that one group. That has now spread, right? There's now Hizb ut-Tahrir, there's Hezbollah, there's Hamas, there's like Boko Haram, like, these Al-Qaeda, ISIS, just spread. There's much more of them. But basically, they are people that want to spread Islam across the globe. Some of them are using violence. Some of them are using these more duplicitous means that cannot be as easily seen. And so, like I was mentioning in the beginning, when my mom was growing up, 50s and 60s in Egypt, and like I said, all over the Middle East, secularism was the path. But then when Iran started this political Islam path, they all started moving in that direction, because now they're all trying to one-up each other, and it just spread throughout the Middle East. So Tunisia, Libya, Iraq, Iran was already there, Yemen, Syria, Egypt, like you name it. It all started moving in this political Islam direction. And my mom just moved with it, So my mom's story is actually the story of so many people and so many countries. You can see the societies changing. I mean, there's a Twitter account called Before Sharia or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of it. Something Before Sharia. But all that Twitter account does is share pictures from all over all of these countries of women going to university. You know what I mean? People singing in the streets, like women riding bicycles, being human. Exactly. Like cinemas in Afghanistan, things that just don't exist anymore. Schools for girls. And then of how things have changed now. So it's just a bunch of before and after photos. And so when you ask me, how common is this, or how is it related to the religion? Well, how common it is it got more and more common over the years. So now when you go to Egypt, basically all women are in hijab, which is it's just a visual indicator. It's just to let you see how much more how conservative the society has become. Yeah. And so it's using the religion as a political tool, basically. So the religion could be faith alone, minding your own business, going to the mosque, you know what I mean? And like just being a good person. But this push, this like mob insistence that everything get pulled into this political direction is what's spread like wildfire. And unfortunately, it's still very visible today.
I mean, you can see celebrities that are becoming Muslim. You can see college campuses that are starting to support things that they don't fully understand. It's interesting. Okay, so it's becoming more and more common to have a household like the one that you grew up in, which, quite honestly, is a little scary. It's a little terrifying, and I think that's the idea. Um, so, I guess one last question: like, why does that matter? Why is because we started our conversation about how while it's okay to allow people to believe what they want to believe, we should be questioning those beliefs because so I'm a
Mm-hmm.
philosophy guy, right? There's this thing called moral relativism, which I do not believe in. I
Yes.
don't know how you feel about it,
Mm-hmm. Of
but
course, I don't believe in it either.
right,
Yeah.
right. So more,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd love to get into the story about the judge and how you're treated for a moment
Mm-hmm.
here, and then I've got some questions from our book club members. Moral relativism is the idea that like things are or are not moral depending on the context of the situation.
Yeah.
And I'm of the opinion that that's not the case. So, for example, is murder moral in one situation, but not in another? No, right? To take a human life is always going to be the wrong thing. To abuse a child is always going to be the wrong thing, no matter who does it, no matter what religion does it, all that stuff. Um, and so I would love to get in really quickly to sort of, I think, the most powerful story in here. Well, actually, let me back up. We had started this with a really sensitive touch point of the ticklish thing, right, which led into this bigger conversation. But to wrap that up, you had started off in this beautiful childhood. It had eroded over time, gotten stricter and stricter to the point where had to experience physical and sexual abuse because of your misbehavior and your non-belief, right? You weren't quoting the Quran perfectly or what have you. You mentioned in your book that he would sort of lash your feet to the bed and whip the bottom of your feet because the teachers couldn't see those markings, right? And that's how you were sort of put in line. Um, well, you eventually lost your sense of feeling, right? Because human beings erode over time. Um, there's actually this interesting study. You might find this interesting. There's a psychologist named Robert J. Lifton. He's got a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but he did a study in the 50s of how prisoners of war and members of the of China were sort of brainwashed into the Maoist thought reform program in the 1950s. And their goal was to convert people, the whole government, to convert people over to Marxism and socialism, those kinds of things, right? And as he interviewed all of these people, he found that groups, religions, organizations typically take people through 8 steps to brainwash them into losing their sense of self-identity so that they'll do whatever they're told, right? And the first step is called milieu control. It's where the group is going to control everything you get to see, hear, experience. We're gonna control all of that. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about this man breaking the records, right? Taking away the Barbies. That's step one to brainwashing. Is
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to control what you get, the inputs coming in. So I just thought you might find that interesting. That's a good study.
Yeah.
Well, you get sort of whittled down, and this program works, right? It takes people's selfhood away until there's a point where most people accept. But you had a moment where you didn't. You went to a teacher and showed him. Can
Yeah.
you tell us about that experience?
Yeah. So Mr. Fabro, who wrote the foreword
Mm-hmm.
to the book, when I was in grade 8, so I was around 12 or 13, my mom had threatened that she was going to take me out of school, and it was my first year being, in a public school, and she found out that I had non-Muslim friends, and so she was going to take me out of school, and I was depressed. And so Mr. Fabro came to ask me what was wrong, what's going on, why are you so sad lately? And I just felt like I had nothing to lose, and I'm going to go back into that prison, because it's like a bubble where you're separated completely from the rest of society. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to tell him, because he's an adult, he's a grown up, he
Mm-hmm.
might be able to do something. And so I told him everything. And, he saw the welts and bruises on me, and he alerted the police, and police alerted Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services did this whole investigation. And, this is a big part of my book, but just to briefly tell you, part of that investigation included this man's daughter herself having a mark on her face that was clearly a hand mark. So they knew that there had been abuse in the household even before I spoke up. I didn't know that the teachers had seen the mark on her cheek and that the authorities had already been alerted. So this was strike 2 for him. And still, when it went to the judge in the end said, this is your culture, you're just going to have to endure. This is it. This is your life.
So the judge ruled against your situation.
Yeah. And he basically threw me back into the lion's den. And you can just imagine now, like, it's like being a rat for the mafia. That's what it was like. You're the rat, you've spoken up, and the cops are like, yeah, no, sorry, we're not going to do anything. Here you go back with the mafia. Like, you can just imagine how they treated me after that. It's like, what are you going to do about it? You've played your one card, and here you are. And so I became quite, I was completely despondent after that. And I became subservient. I became accepting. I stopped fighting. It worked.
Mm-hmm. How old were you at that time?
I was 13.
Yeah. See, I have a 14-year-old daughter right now. So the idea of her going through that, like having to represent herself in a court system to say I'm being abused, just blows my mind, because she's the sweetest thing ever. And for her to have to sit up there and do that, and then for the legal system to say, normally we would side with you because you are clearly being abused. There are marks, we can see them, but we want to be inclusive of beliefs. So we're going to let this slide because your family is of a specific religion. And that is moral relativism. The judge made a call relative to the context when he should have done what was right for the child. And that's the subtitle of your book.
Yeah.
How Western liberals are empowering radical Islam. You make a comment that he was a well-intentioned judge. He was trying to be inclusive, but that was misguided. And he ended up promoting these really sort of misogynistic, patronizing sort of like belief systems that cause young women and all women harm.
Yeah,
maybe he did or did not know he was doing that, but that's what he was doing. Yeah, it is a road to hell. Well, I have a question here from somebody in the book club, which I really liked. I thought this was good. He asks, many events you wrote about still come to mind for me, especially about food. A family member dumped bones back into food you prepared to spark outrage in your abusive spouse. Your brother force-fed grapes to your infant child. And oddly enough, your uncle refused to read ingredients on a candy wrapper as you told him the chocolate bar also contained rice. And he wanted to know, how do you teach your child to nourish themselves, to think critically for themselves, amidst sort of those experiences, just to be mindful? What's your thought on all that?
That's interesting. I'd never connected all of those food stories. So that's very...
He's a pretty mindful reader.
Poignant. Yeah. Very, very thoughtful, very perceptive. With being a parent, it's the long way around. It's the more difficult way. But I never used the phrase "because I said so." Do you know what I mean? Like, I was constantly allowing my daughters to ask whatever questions they wanted. And, there is a certain time when that's really difficult. And my husband would get really frustrated, like, just end this conversation. I'd be like, no, like, it was life or death for me. Like, no, we will continue to answer her questions. And we would go to Google and we'd try to figure it out, because quite often she's asking me questions I have no idea. I didn't even think about before, let alone do I have the answers to them. But you just have to, celebrate, not just cultivate, but celebrate that questioning, and always let them feel empowered that they can find the maybe not the right answer, but some answers to think about. Everything isn't black and white. There isn't a clean answer for everything written in a book, a 1,500-year-old book. No, like sometimes we don't know yet and we're still trying to figure it out. And these are some different theories and these are some different ideas and here's some different research, and just constantly cultivating that in my daughters. And, I've got some interesting stories for you since you've asked this question. Like with my first daughter,
Please.
she got to the point when she was in high school where she was like, Mom, I want to be a Christian. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll start taking you to church. Mm-hmm. And because she's a teenager and she just like wanted to like explore this new thing that like, Mom's got a problem with religions. What if I don't? What Shocker. If I like religions? Yeah. Okay, well, cool. Let me take you. Well, she's a very squeamish young lady. She still is. And once they brought her the blood of Christ, she was just like, what the fuck?
I ain't drinking this.
Get me out of here. Yeah. So she just was just like, I can't do that. And I was like, all right, cool. Whatever you want to do. Like, just we'll figure it out together. My other little one, she was maybe like she wasn't even 5 years old yet. And she just kept on asking too many questions about Santa Claus. And I never confirmed or denied, you know what I mean? I just answered all of her questions. And then she was like, yeah, this guy isn't real, right? Yeah. And again, this was a thing with my husband because he loved the footsteps in the snow and the little carrot for Rudolph and all that stuff. And I confirmed it at that. She asked me a straight up question. And so I had to answer her. And so this was like way before her other friends at school. And it was a thing with other parents. And but I was like, I stand firm. I will never lie to my kids. And I will always encourage them to ask questions until they come to their own conclusions. I'm not going to tell them what to think, but I'm going to help them think, teach them how to think. And so that's what I mean when I say it's the long way around, but it's the best. It's the best way to be, I was such a curious kid. I still am a very curious person. And it was so stifling. People are different. My mom used to just love that all the answers to all of the world's questions were all in one book. And she just thought the idea of like a library was exhausting. She's like, oh, look at these non-believers going to libraries filled with books. They have to read all of these books to get the answers. I have all the answers in one book. And I remember feeling like almost like so repulsed at that idea. Like, what do you mean? Like you've just shrunk your world. Like, and so, the way that they forced me to shrink myself and to shut my mind down was probably one of the most abusive parts of my childhood. And so that's why with my daughters, I'm constantly like, yep, even other people just would not believe the kinds of things that these girls would ask me. They question me all the time and question our family and things we're doing and whatever. But, that's, I loved that. I encouraged that, and it made me like almost heal little Yasmine, that they could do that.
So I have, I recently left a faith as well. I used to be Mormon, and I left about a year ago. And I'm about to turn 44, and I'm finding that I'm trying to learn myself how to think critically, and it's definitely a skill, because we all come with biases, right? We all have baggage and emotions, and I'm just curious. Because we've had this beautiful experience with our kids where we've taught them to start thinking for themselves, right? Because we also had a book that had all of the answers. We had the Bible, but the Mormons also have the Book of Mormon, and so those come together. And we've spent 20 years just teaching our kids to just believe these books. And now, one day, my wife just came and said, okay, we're just going to start asking some questions, right? We're just going to
Yeah.
think for a minute. And the mental health of my kids went up 15
Ah,
notches instantly,
wow.
right? They were
Oh,
just like,
that's
oh my
beautiful.
gosh, this is, yeah, it's, and all of a sudden my wife and I didn't have the Christian guilt thing, and we could just be with
Mm-hmm.
people and love people and not always be like, well, you're a non-member, so now I have to convert you. There's just a lot of stuff, right?
Yes, I
Um,
know.
do you find, because you sort of have spent a fair part of your life not being allowed to think critically, do you ever find yourself in some knee-jerk reactions where you're having to catch yourself as a parent and be like, wait, you know, because it's easy as a parent to say, because I told you so, because you get tired
Yeah,
at night and what have you,
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
how,
I didn't have that with the thinking critically, but I did have that with the
good.
purity culture.
Let's
I
talk about
remember
that.
when
That's a fun one.
yeah, I remember when my older daughter came down the stairs, her body's changing. She's like maybe 12 or 13 at this point. And she's like wanting to wear different clothes because, she's feeling proud of her new body. And I was like,
Yeah.
immediately my whole all the cells in all of my skin were just like I can't let her out the house like that, like everybody's gonna think she's
Yeah.
a whore, like I've raised
Yeah.
it just like complete all of that stuff just like came up. And it was a process. It takes
Mhm.
a lot of, you don't realize, and I think, sorry to tell you this, but you've probably already recognized this, that once you start the dismantling of the brainwashing, there's little bits that are hiding in little crevices and nooks and crannies that you don't know they're there. And then something
Mhm.
happens and then you're like, whoa, what, that was hidden like that. I still had that in me.
Mhm.
So I went through it all with like the anti-Semitism and the homophobia and all of that stuff, but I had never gotten to the point where that purity culture, I didn't know that it was still there because I didn't have it with me. I didn't have it with my friends. I didn't have it with random women in the streets or whatever, but it came up when it was my daughter. And so it's quite scary actually, because and it makes you angry and it makes you sad and it makes you sick because you feel like, oh, there's still more work to do. Like I still have stuff in there. Like here I go again, like now I have to deprogram this
Yeah.
part.
Well,
But
that
at the
that
same
makes me
time,
think.
it's also nice. It's also good. It's like
Mhm.
realizing that there's like this hornet's nest being built quietly in the attic. And when you discover it, it's like, oh, I have to clean it. But at the same time, it's nice to get rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes me actually think of the TED Talk that Sam Harris did. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
brought Sam in at the beginning of this, but in one of his TED Talks, which I think you mentioned really sort of
Yeah.
got you going as well, he talks about he shows two pictures, like one of women wearing the niqab and then the Western version of women in bikinis, and they're just completely, and he's like, I understand why we're on separate sides, but there's probably a good middle here. And I experienced the purity culture too, because in Mormonism, purity is a big deal. It's like
Mm-hmm.
your self worth is tied to how pure you are,
Yeah.
and if you get anything wrong, like everybody kind of knows. Like you talked about taking the bread and the wine or whatever. In Mormon church, they don't do wine; they do water. But if you've done something wrong, you're not, usually you kind of have to pass that without taking it. And everybody looks at you and goes,
Mm.
why didn't you take the bread and water? And now it's like
Yeah.
this purity shame. It's weird.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's
well,
effective.
we've got it. Yeah, we've got a couple other questions, and I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to try and tackle these real fast. And then I want to end with Free Hearts, Free Minds, because it's a beautiful organization. I wonder if you tell us about that. So,
Thank you.
all right. So the next one here was, so one of the members just asked if you have any thoughts on sort of further reading, and that's a big question. But the reason why I like Unveiled is because a lot of creators, authors, YouTubers, the news, they all have an incentive. There's incentivization out there to get more followers, to get more readers. And so you'll often write things that aren't always accurate or true. But the reason why this sort of really speaks loudly to me is because by publishing it, you're putting your life in danger. Your incentives are very different than most authors. And so it's, I feel like I can trust what's being written in here because it's terrifying. But do you have, like, how do we, as especially people in the West, like, how can we get more educated on this? Do you have any thoughts on books we can read, authors we can trust, news outlets we can trust? I know news outlets are like, they're always swayed, but it's like, oh my gosh, who do you believe? And what's your thought there?
I would say go to the source. So we do a lot of listening to people who are speaking about others. Ben Affleck, for example, let's listen to the source. Let's listen to the people in these countries that are having these experiences. And like you mentioned, this is not as easy as them picking up their phone and just doing an Instagram video, right? Like they are in totalitarian societies where it's very difficult for them to get their voices out. But even so, people like me who have been able to live in free societies, we've been sharing our stories. We've been writing our books. So there's one of the books that I would recommend is Radical by Majid Nawaz. He's kind of gone down a different path in life right now, but that book talks about how he was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an Islamist group in the UK. So he talks about how they used their tactics to gain control in the UK. Masih Alinejad, who is an Iranian author who wrote a book called Wind in My Hair, and she talks about basically the gender apartheid happening in Iran. She doesn't talk about Afghanistan so much in that book. We don't, at the time, that was during the period when America was in Afghanistan and things were quiet. And then, of course, the resurgence of the Taliban, things are like even worse than they were in the 90s now. But it's very, very difficult to get voices of Afghan women. But there are Afghan men who have written books out there. Raheel Raza, who is a Canadian author. Tariq Fatah is another Canadian author. Both of them are Muslims. Tariq, unfortunately, is not with us anymore. But these are Muslim people who are speaking from within the community still. Asra Nomani is another one. Zudi Jasser is another one. So these are all people who are hoping to bring their religion into this century. They know they can't change the books. They know they can't change the Quran and the Hadith, but they're hoping to encourage Muslims to do a little bit of cherry picking and like set aside these things that are, that do not fit with a liberal democracy or do not fit with this century. Obviously, Sam Harris, definitely at the top of, always he's at the top of any reading list. If you're looking for something on, like, say, for example, the Israel-Palestine conflict, read books from Einat Wilf, for example. She is a great author. In fact, I have one of her books on my bookshelf here that I just finished reading. I would just say go to the source. Go to the people who are living, like, Einat, born and raised in Israel. She was on the left her whole life. She still considers herself on the left. Because that matters, because, people don't want to listen to you if they think that you're from their political opponent. But none of these left and right, none of that means anything anymore. Like it's in fact, that's the problem. That's why we're here, is because everybody thinks that they need to be in their camp, speaking the way that the rest of their, camp wants them to speak. And people have like shut down their brains, and they're just like, it's like a cult mentality now where you just have to follow what your tribe says. And that's reminds me of the religion that I escaped from, right? Like that's not what we want. So anyway, I would say listen to the stories of the people who are from these countries, who are the dissenters, the people like me who are whistleblowers, who them telling you these stories means that they're putting their lives in danger, but that's how important it is for them to get the story out. So quite often these are self-published books, because there's not a lot of mainstream support for these kind of dissenting voices. Those are the people I would say look for authentic voices. Don't go for somebody speaking about others through whatever lens, because they always have a lens, but instead listen to the people who are speaking about themselves and their own experiences.
It's very good. I would have to think too that a lot of the publishers probably feel like they would be scared to publish something because it would not be inclusive or it would be whatever, and they want
exactly.
Right. That's again the whole message of So, well,
and
the
also
last
security.
question.
That was another one that was cited to me a lot. Was like, I'm not sure if we have the security to take on this task.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. The last question is a really good one, and it's one that I struggle with, and I don't know the answer. Well, I know a little bit of it, but the question here is how do we get sort of U.S. culture back on track? We can't answer that in
that's a big
10-hour meeting. But the question really comes down to like how do we make a difference? Like my name's Eddie. I live in Utah. I'm a white male. That's already working against me, unfortunately. But I wrote a post a couple of days ago on my blog of just because of the color of my skin, that doesn't mean I can't love everybody and care and work hard. Like, don't discount me either. But what can somebody like myself do? And I think this is probably a good segue into Free Hearts, Free Minds, or any other tips you have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so Free Hearts, Free Minds is, it's a movement to support free thinkers in the Muslim world, from Muslim communities throughout the world, actually. So we started off in the beginning where it was just in the Muslim majority world, but as we've grown, we found that there's people who have similar stories in Afghanistan and in Sweden. Like it's just absolutely, it's crazy. And quite often they're part of this separatist society. Like I was describing the way I grew up, like in a bubble, where you're separated from the rest of the people around you. So even though you're like born and raised in Scotland, for example, you're not, interacting with Scottish people. You're living in like this little enclave where you're only interacting with Pakistanis. We're able to support people through empowering themselves through a lot of mental health support. There's group support, there's individual support, and then there's also community support, so that we end up supporting each other. And groups have gotten together in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia, and people who've been through the program, you can trust each other because they've all been vetted. And I cannot tell you, Eddie, how meaningful that is. I mean, you'll kind of get this because Mormons are kind of a closed society too. And so when you leave the church, you're essentially, I don't know if your family was Mormon as well, your parents, but you could lose everybody you've ever known. I mean, I'm really grateful that your wife was on the same path with you, but some people even lose their spouse. Yeah. You could lose your children. You could lose your job, if you're you could lose everything you've ever known. And so the trauma is just so deep and touches every single part of your life. And so to be able to have a community where those people can come together and they can share their experiences without being judged and people thinking that they're you know what I mean? The devil or the enemy or satanic or whatever, but you can actually ask questions and be accepted. We have had, because we do these mental health tests before and after the program, and we have seen people's mental health scores skyrocket up over 90%. It's kind of what you described with your kids. If you just open the door and allow people the freedom to be their authentic selves, you're basically saying, I'm going to help you to remove this persona that you've created to survive, basically, and now you get to be yourself. Like, that is everything to somebody. It was everything to me. And I'm so grateful to be part of this organization where I can do that for other people. We have a lot of bad things to say about social media. I had some shade to throw at TikTok earlier, but if it wasn't for social media, we wouldn't all be able to find each other. People wouldn't be able to express themselves, and we wouldn't be able to have this organization because it's international, it's global. We have to do it, using Telegram, using Zoom, using WhatsApp, you know what I mean? Like using all of these different tools. So we're at a good time, like a good time as a planet to help people break out of indoctrination. It was a lot easier back when you controlled the education, you controlled the media, you controlled everything, but now people can go online and they can be like, what's the Holocaust? I never heard of that, and then they can start learning, and so it encourages people to break out of this like indoctrination and this one narrative that they've been fed their whole life. So, and once they come out of it, as you know, it's difficult and scary. And so to have a support system, a safe space, oh gosh, so isolating. Absolutely.
Yeah. Super lonely. So yeah, I think if people are looking to help, I would like to just recapture what Yasmine said there, which is to, find yourself, but through Free Hearts and Free Minds, you can donate there. You can go onto the website and just Google Free Hearts, Free Minds. You'll find it. But find ways to support that too. But I also want to share with you a specific way that you helped me really quickly. As I was listening to a podcast you did with Sam Harris, and you talked about how when people feel like they need to reference somebody of a specific faith or a specific skin color, they add that to the comments. So like, there was a black man at the grocery store today that I saw that helped me or whatever. And you used the term, you're othering us. Like, don't other us. We're just people. And it hit me like a ton of bricks because I live in Utah. The population here is like 98% white Mormon. It's just like, that's all I've ever known. It's very rare to see somebody of color walking down our streets. And I've never seen somebody of the Muslim faith in Utah. It's just not a thing.
Maybe I'll move to Utah.
Yeah. Well, so, but
it'll be safer for me.
Yeah. But if I were to see like a black man, for example, I would just naturally say, oh, there was this black guy that whatever. And it hit me like, why do I feel like I have to do that? Why isn't it just, there was this guy that helped me at the grocery store? Why am I adding these things? And so I think that's one thing we can do to fight a little bit, is to realize that we ourselves can just see people as people and not as Muslims or black people or anything, just the people. And then, I think you're fighting a war that a lot of people are scared to fight, which is you're not only educating people, but you're trying to deal with all the misinformation out there, which, to come full circle, is why we're seeing protests on campuses, why we're seeing Ben Affleck kind of get it wrong. So I think if there's anything we can do to help fight, it would be to listen for some misinformation, which means we need to get educated first, right? We have to read good source material and know what's really happening, not what our political parties say we should believe. And then just when we hear misinformation, just ask people questions like, why do you feel that way? Why do you feel that, you should be rallying for Hamas? What is it about their call that speaks to you?
Just to have the courage to ask questions. Yes.
Yeah. And if they say something that is a little off point, like maybe Ben Affleck did, just say, well, have you considered this point? Because this is what's happening in the news. And just, I think we can sort of help fight the bad ideas out there a little bit without anger and violence. But beautiful. Well, Yasmine, it has been a pleasure speaking with you. You are one of the, you're definitely a hero. This book is a big deal. I know you're not seeking to be a hero, but the fact that you've published and put your life on the line to do it means a lot. What would you? What are ways people can follow you? Because you've got a beautiful podcast, you've got a lot going on. How can we support you?
Yeah, interesting question. Considering I just got locked out of Twitter today, but
Again?
that would have been
Jeez.
that would have been the
Is this
first
the
place.
third time for you?
It's the second time, but I was locked out because some stories that I tell in my book, some ways depict, like I talk about the violence that you referred to it there. One of the ways was tying my feet to the bottom of the bed and hitting the bottom of my feet. And so these videos surfaced online of this happening to kids in the exact same way that I described it in my book. And so people started sharing those videos with me. And I didn't have the heart to share the videos, of course, because they're just way too disturbing. But I took a couple of stills and I posted a tweet with some stills. And so I guess that violated something in Twitter world or X world. And so normally that would be the best place to find me. But I'm also on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, but no, I'm not very active there. And like you mentioned, I do have a weekly podcast, which, like you, there's an audience that is invited to join. So anybody can sign up to join as well. And I'm also co-director of an organization called the Clarity Coalition, which I'm co-director with a Muslim man, one of the men that I mentioned when you're asking about further reading. And his name is Dr. Zudi Jasser, and he's running for Congress in Phoenix, Arizona. So he's one of those Muslim men who believes in liberty and in democracy and in all that good stuff. A true American patriot. He served as a Marine. And so to start this organization with him was really meaningful because, he's a Muslim and I'm an ex-Muslim, and together we're fighting against this ideology. And it's not just me and him, it's people from all over the world, all different ethnicities, all different religions, all different everything, all different political spectrum. So it's just people who want to fight against this Islamism. Then please go to claritycoalition.org and watch the little intro video there. And if you're interested in joining us, click on the Join Us button. And I think I've highlighted all of the things that I'm working on right now.
Perfect. Well, I think a good way to wrap up here is one of the book club members just wanted to point out, says, Yasmine is a modern day heroine, and I hope my own daughter can look up to courageous humans like her. Thank you so much, Yasmine. Yeah, it's very good. We all have daughters, and it makes us think personally. Now, I'm going to be listening to all of your stuff going forward and supporting you whatever way I can, but I do expect one thing from you. I want to hear more Scooby-Doo language when you interview with people. See if we can get some of that in there. I'm going to clap
just
every time
for you,
I hear
Eddie.
it. So that's it. Perfect.
I'll put little Easter eggs for you and check up if you found it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'll just wrap up the episode here real quick. Is there any last thoughts you have before we say goodbye?
No, just thank you to you because, everything that you were saying, the courage of me speaking out, et cetera, like the courage of you inviting me onto your platform as well.
Sure.
Like I have to acknowledge that. And I appreciate that. It is really difficult. As much as I'm constantly talking, I'm up against a brick wall at all times. So I'm very, very appreciative of people like you who are willing to have me on to share my story and to hopefully get my message out.
Well, that's great. Yeah. And that's why we read books at the podcast. Our goal is to read books and read them well so that we can see the world in a new way. Otherwise, what's the point of reading books, right? So I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode of the Read Well podcast. Yasmine, is so honored to have you here with us, and we will be supporting you in the future. But as always, everybody, until next week, remember to read slowly, take notes, and apply the ideas. I'll see you next time.